I confess I don't have a very high view of Christian movies. Part of that is because I'm a little nitpicky about movies in general. I'm the guy who sits there watching the latest Hollywood blockbuster, thinking to myself, well, given the personality disorder this character exhibited earlier in the film, that's not how he would react in this situation. What he would have done when confronted with this moral dilemma is this other thing. So for lots of movies I watch, I'm sitting there thinking, how did you spend all this time and money making this, but you didn't fix these obvious plot holes? With Christian movies in particular, I have two additional problems. One, it's always in my mind that if you're making a film to glorify the Almighty, it should be absolutely epic. It should be the best film playing in the theater. I understand that production companies don't always have the budgets to spend trunks of money on Christian films, although sometimes they do, like the original Ben-Hur or The Passion of the Christ. So it's hard to compete with Hollywood movies that have $200 million budgets, but you can make up for that by being creative. The Blair Witch Project had a budget of like $60,000. It grossed almost $250 million at the box office, which means you can make a film that people want to see even on a lower budget. So if you're making it for God, make it awesome. Making a Christian movie should be like building a cathedral. The only acceptable outcome is excellence. Two, Christian movies tend to water down and oversimplify reality. And there's a reason for that. If you're making a Christian movie, part of your target audience is little old Christian ladies who are going to go watch it after their pastor recommends it at church. You don't want to traumatize these little old Christian ladies, so you have to be careful about what you put in your movie. But a lot of Christian movies are about people who have serious issues, massive moral problems, but then they turn to Jesus at some point. And things have to get watered down to make the story safe for a Christian audience. Let's say you're making a movie about a homeless drug addict who prostitutes herself to pay for meth, but eventually becomes a Christian. How do you tell that story? Obviously, you're not going to show certain things that would be part of that person's life, but how do you accurately show anything that would be part of that person's life? Even if you show a conversation this homeless, drug-addicted prostitute has with another character, how realistic can you make that conversation? You have to tone down the language and the topic matter. You have to make the conversation Christian movie friendly. And in doing so, you make the conversation inauthentic, unrealistic. In other words, I would be watching that movie thinking, that is not how these characters would talk. This is like a nice Christian's idea of how this conversation would go, but not how the conversation would actually go. Now, I don't know what you do about this problem. Do you make the scenes and the dialogue so realistic that your Christian movie ends up being R-rated and a bunch of your target audience won't watch it? You don't want to do that. So we might just be stuck with watering down reality to make it safe for Christian movies. That may be the most effective way to do things. But I'm usually not terribly interested in watching it. So I wasn't going to go watch Jesus Revolution because I'm in the habit of not watching most Christian films. Then my friend John McCrae, What Do You Meme, posted a video about it. John has terrible taste in movies, music, and friends, so his endorsement of a film would normally be a good reason not to watch it. But a bunch of people in the comments said they liked it, so my wife and I headed to the theater. For the first 20 or 30 minutes, I was not impressed. It was exactly what I expected. I looked at my watch multiple times, wondering how long I was going to have to sit there. But then the movie started to grow on me. I used to watch Cheers back in the day, so I like Fraser Crane. He plays a pastor in Jesus Revolution, a pastor who decides, against the wishes of certain members of his congregation, to invite hippies into his church. All of the acting was good. Some of the dialogue was standard, kind of cheesy Christian movie dialogue. But this kind of cheesy Christian movie dialogue was eventually overshadowed by some really good dialogue. and more importantly, by some very significant, very meaningful, very timely messages. And keep in mind, Jesus' Revolution is a true story about a Christian revival in California. Two big takeaways from Jesus' Revolution. First, the main point of the film is that Christians shouldn't be Pharisees. Hippies made Christians really uncomfortable. Hippies were these young people walking around barefoot, living in tents, not taking showers, getting high, and having sex in the park. Do you want these weirdos in your church? Of course not. A bunch of smelly hippies walking into your church would make your congregation extremely uncomfortable. But when did being comfortable become the supreme goal of Christianity? Jesus didn't make people comfortable. He made people really, really uncomfortable. He made people so uncomfortable that they wanted him dead. And one of the things he did that made people really, really uncomfortable was that he would hang out with the outcasts of society. People that the Pharisees, the religious elite of that time, wouldn't touch with a stick. Jesus would hang out with tax collectors and prostitutes. And tax collectors in first century Israel were not like IRS agents. These were Jewish tax collectors who collected money from their fellow Jews for their Roman oppressors. Tax collectors were viewed as traitors, selling out their own people for profit. But Jesus would eat with them and have discussions with them. One of the tax collectors even became an apostle, the Apostle Matthew. Jesus associated with outcasts. And when people would ask him, "Why are you hanging out with these sinners?" he would reply, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor. I didn't come for the righteous. I came for sinners. I came for the lost." That idea should be built into Christianity, and yet every generation has its share of Pharisees. The Pharisees weren't just a first century Jewish group. The Pharisee mindset is always with us, telling us, stay away from those people. Those people are too awful. In fact, as I was watching Jesus' Revolution, checking my watch, and we got to the part where Frazier started bringing hippies into his church, and some of his congregation left, I began wondering, am I being a film Pharisee? Do I think I'm too good for this movie because it's not Mad Max Fury Road? Am I sitting here in judgment instead of just watching a film and seeing where it goes? Indeed, I was. I was being a film Pharisee. But I kept watching, and they did an excellent job making a point about Christians doing the difficult work of opening their arms to society's outcasts, like Jesus did. Second, Jesus' Revolution made a good point about God using people who are far from perfect. The original disciples of Jesus were a band of misfits. Then they were joined by the Apostle Paul, who started off as a Pharisee and a Christian killer. And somehow this band of misfits turned the world upside down, even after the most powerful empire the world had ever seen targeted them for destruction. And when you watch Jesus' Revolution, you see a bunch of deeply flawed people leading a Christian revival. One of those people, Lonnie Frisbee, is someone that a lot of Christians would like to erase from the history of the California revival. Lonnie Frisbee, in the movie and in real life, was the hippie who convinced Pastor Chuck Smith, i.e. Fraser Crane, to invite hippies into his church. Lonnie said, "These young people are looking for all the right things in all the wrong places. They're like sheep without a shepherd, and somehow Christians want nothing to do with them." Lonnie Frisbee had some awesome qualities and some serious problems. He loved Jesus, he loved people, he also had serious psychological and moral problems. It would have been very easy to ignore or minimize his role in the Jesus Revolution in California. Instead, the film highlights his role in the revival, showing that God continues using misfits to reach the lost. Hats off to the writers and producers for not giving in to the relentless urge to make Christians seem better than we are. So, should you go see Jesus Revolution while it's still in theaters? You can, of course, always see it some other way later, but there's one more consideration here. Hollywood production companies are always paying close attention to who shows up to the movie theaters. If you'd like to see more Christian films, you can actually send a message by what you watch. Now, you don't want to go see bad Christian movies just because they're Christian movies. That sends the wrong message. That sends the message that Christians will watch garbage as long as it's got something to do with Jesus. So you don't want to go see bad Christian movies. But if a Christian film is worth watching, Christians should go watch it. And Jesus Revolution is worth watching. Side note for those of you with normally functioning human emotions, my wife was crying for like half the movie. So, Jesus Revolution is apparently quite moving for normal people.